Kate Milefalter, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. And we are continuing with part 2 of our Saturday book, The Invasion of Eden by the remarkable Paul Wallis. And let's just dive right in, shall we? We are starting, as I said, video number 2, but we're on chapter 3, Gods and Doors. Ankara, East Turkey, 2024. If these logical steps are correct, then the reliefs on the box that we've been talking about, the black basalt box from Lake Van, tell of the Elohim, the sky armies who appeared to Abraham and his ancestors and descendants. This is what? Human? ETs? Something else? That's what we're trying to figure out here. Armenians call themselves, now remember that Paul does linguistics, and so he really likes to get into it, and I haven't necessarily dug all the way in because I would have to read the book out loud, and I don't want to do that. I'm getting in trouble. Buy the book. But in the meantime, I'll try to summarize it as well as I can. Armenians call themselves the Haya of Hayastan, H-A-Y-A, the Haya of Hayastan. And King Hayak is associated with the iconography of Haldi, H-A-L-D, and Hayak is associated with outer space. So he's making this link here, this connection between these powerful beings, the beginnings of the origins of the human race, stories of beings from outer space, and these earthly kings. Hayak is a giant like the hybrids Gilgamesh and Minos. All three are associated with gods or sky people, and especially sky from Orion. Aboriginal cultures often associate 3 constellations with paleocontact and directly with human origin. Those constellations are Orion, the Pleiades, and Sirius. So all 3 of these giants are a bridge between humanity and the aliens. They're also associated with powerful technological weapons and conquest. Hayak said to be descendants of Noah, who was also, Hayak is said, I abbreviate sometimes and I forget what I've been talking about. Hayak is said to be a descendant of Noah, who was also in a lot of these other ancient myths, and it's global. There are 4 to 5 generations of repopulation after a cataclysm, is what the pattern seems to be. Genesis calls Mount Ararat the resting place of the ark, the high place, and it's a place from which humanity began again. Armenian tradition claims a direct line from this. So the Armenians tell this story and claim that their people are a direct descendant of Noah, the leftover human. In Norse myth, the ancient Viking sagas talked about Odin and his people who migrated through Russia into Germany, into Scandinavia, but really before they got to Russia, they started out in Turkland, in Asa land, which is the area of ancient Armenia. So let's look at this here. Where are my glasses? Okay. Odin was accompanied by a great army of old and young men and women carrying their treasures with them. Through whatever lands they traveled, the things spoken of them were so great that they were regarded more like gods than men. It goes on to talk, and these are the Eddas, E-D-D-A, the sagas of the Scandinavians. They had magical abilities like precognition, and they were unmistakably superior to regular human beings, and yet the narratives show them to be emphatically flesh and blood of some kind. And he recommends the book Viking Superpowers by researcher David Lovegrove. So he goes on to talk about these Eddas, these sagas from Scandinavia, and how really these are just repeating the stories that one hears from Armenia, filtered through a number of cultures and time. They were the emissaries of a society hidden in the mountains of ancient Armenia, is what he's saying, and superior to regular human beings, and their language became the mother tongue. The Nordic languages do have close linguistic connections to the language of ancient Armenia. Now, you could have asked me all day long, and I would never have come up with that connection. That's really pretty incredible. But they're able to make direct linguistic connections. These legends and these Eddas, they're not fiction, but they're fragments of a cultural history. This is what Paul is espousing, and it's what a number of archaeologists and linguists and theologians and anthropologists, paleontologists are beginning to figure out. Thor Heyerdahl, remember him? Kon-Tiki. Thor Heyerdahl suggested that Odin was a real king 2,000 years ago associated with Roman expansion. Paul Wallis points out that it does suggest the stories get conflated. He said, you can see a lot of overlap and similarities, but they're putting stories together. Biblical Abraham stories are far more ancient than even these human origin stories. So we're talking about stories from before Cataclysm and then stories after the Cataclysm. A number of academics and researchers agree there is a linguistic connection between Swedish and ancient Armenian. It's just incredible. Armenia seems to be the source of language, culture, technology, and human migration for everybody now. So I didn't bother to write this out because there just didn't seem to be a whole lot of point. But here are the reasons why somebody would point to this uncanny concentration of archaeological firsts in Armenia. And he says it points to Armenia as a powerhouse. So let's go through this list very quickly. One of the world's oldest languages, some of the earliest artifacts of human settlement, some of the earliest evidence of building with stone, the earliest artifacts of agronomy, early iron technology referenced in classical literature, the earliest physical artifacts of iron technology, a close claim to the Noah story of catastrophe, external intervention, and repopulation, dating of archaeological artifacts which could precede the most recent planetary cataclysm, the Younger Dryas. So the mythical correlations, he says, are also numerous. Armenia as the earthly point of origin of the godlike people of Odin. Chaldea as the bringer of architecture and civil engineering. Agriculture and civil engineering. Abraham and the Ur of Chaldea in ancient Armenia. Haran in ancient Armenia. Abraham's grandson, the migrant from Aram. Noah and the high place of Ararat where the ark ran to ground. Home of Hayek, the 2 or 3 times great-grandson of Noah, via Noah's son Hapet, who is Japheth. I can't say that in Hebrew. The possible home of Abraham, the 7 times great-grandson of Noah, and Hayek as a bridge to the stars of Orion. Direct mythological links there. Paul suggests that the sagas of Odin, the archaeology of Hayek and Chaldea are a cultural memory of non-human intervention. And that would explain the meaning of the reliefs on this box that they found in Lake Van. And they do seem to indicate a biological and cultural restart. People argue the distance and light years that were involved make that completely impossible. But later in the book, you're going to find that experts weigh in, and experts are aware of the exotic materials and the nature of the space program that the government is running right now, the program, capital letters, that they're studying all this stuff. The ancient Armenians explained the logistics of interstellar travel, and the United States and NASA, and military and NASA have been studying their suggestions for decades and spending billions of dollars on it. So why would the NASA be studying the ancient Armenians? Just stop and think about that for a minute. Why would they be spending billions of dollars on studying the Armenians? The reliefs on the basalt box depict three-step pyramids with open doors on ground level. And these are also seen, the same depictions are seen in Machu Picchu, in the work of Da Vinci, and in other esoteric art. Paul points out that Jesus called himself the doorway and the gate, also the way and the truth and the life. How to connect with Source, the Father in heaven, as he called him. Jesus is presented as a triptych doorway. This is mirrored in the Orthodox Church architecture. They have three doorways that show mystical connection between visible reality and the spiritual realm. And they equal the access to higher wisdom, higher dimensions, the eternal, to higher power and ascension. Haldy's triptych predates this by thousands of years. In Genesis, the purpose of the Tower of Babel, the power gate, was to reach the heavens, to send observers to stations in the stars. Ergo, the Tower of Babel, the power gate, was a star gate. In fact, the U.S. military has been obsessed with the idea of Stargate in modern Iraq. This always blows my mind when we get on this subject. Like, maybe there's a whole different slant to what happened in Iraq. But they've been obsessed with the idea of a Stargate in modern Iraq since 2000. In his previous book, Paul describes a naos used by Asherah. So an NAOS, it's an abbreviation. Used by Asherah, which is Hebrew teacher. And this was a vehicle that was used to travel from the celestial home to the Levant, the Middle East. The celestial home, by the way, was the Pleiades. Similarly, the three ziggurats on Earth served in some way to let Haldy communicate with his colleagues in space. So is this some sort of technology like the Tower of Babel or like the Naos? So here are three different mentions of seemingly technological means of communicating with people in the sky. Matt, his friend Matt, mentions these four-sided inverted pyramids are global and they all have triple doorways. And do those symbolize, to a certain extent, harmony, balance, and the pathway of human progress? The reliefs depict balance between the right and left brain, the yin and the yang, the male and the female. Let's see here. To break it down, the scene on the box, this black box, presents Haldy as a bringer of balance, a bearer of life, a giver of agricultural science and well-being, a carrier of advanced knowledge, medical science, higher technology, and an activator of higher cognitive powers. But this, of course, is a two-dimensional projection. So he goes on to say, is the cognitive upgrade represented by the pine cone? Remember, the pine cone sort of represents the pineal gland, which has to do with higher cognitive abilities. Does this cognitive upgrade represented by the pine cone, is that for us? Are we the ones who have had that? Is this image evoking the memory of a past upgrade of humanity, or is the offer of something ongoing? Where exactly are you and I in that picture modern humans, the ongoing human race. Haldi also is depicted with weapons. Paul notes that the root of Haldi is the root of the word Haldi is conqueror or taken, and the great conqueror is also an interpretation of that. Therefore, his arrival should be regarded as an invasion because he was regarded as a conqueror. Well, who was he conquering? The people he came to visit, us. This story appears globally, and it's a common indigenous narrative. It includes invasion, conquest, and or help and nurture, and salvation from disaster with advanced technology, repeating themes. So why doesn't the modern West embrace this? That's a really good question. The only way Western leaders, Congress, will engage with topics like this is in the context of war and national security. They won't look at it under any other circumstance. Paul asked Nick Pope. I hope you know who Nick Pope was. For 20 years, he was the English Ministry of Defense UFO investigator. And he really had an uphill battle, I'll tell you what. He says that you get more findings if you play up the fundings, if you play up the threat aspect. Not being transparent, though, leads to conspiracy theories. I think we all know that. I have a question here that we need to get answered at some point. Why did Nick Pope quit? I'm not implying there was any underhandedness or anything, but I'm curious, why did he choose to leave his job? Because he had this really remarkable job. I wonder if he got tired of the battles. I wonder if he realized they weren't taking him seriously. I just would love to know why. Anyway, today, Congress finally seems to be seeking information from the Pentagon, and it all seems to be on a pause right now. It was really heating up at the beginning of COVID. What direction will it go? Paul fears that it'll be a response like the war on terror, anxiety leveraged by power. Emergency measures become greater power flex. Then you get a black budget that grows, and then billions of dollars every year with 60% of it not accounted for, and $9 trillion of public money going where? The loss of democratic freedoms with the Patriot Act, the Homeland Security, et cetera, et cetera. He's talking about what happened after 9/11. You could see the writing on the wall, and he fears that's the pattern that's being established now. The war on terror, for example, there was no real enemy. There were no geographic limits. There were no time frames established, no boundaries, either physically or in chronologically. And imagine the response to an ET threat. This would be planetary security that they'd be worried about. He goes to Harvard. That can't be Harvard, can it? Maybe. To learn about ancient response to the threat. He goes to a place where I can't read my handwriting, but we will, the more we get into it here. Actually, why don't I? It's at the very end of this chapter, so I might be able to find it. Well, it seems like he's going to Ankara. You can tell it's been a while since I read this book. Oh. I hope you're patient with me and you laugh because I think it's pretty funny. It's Hawaii. He goes to Hawaii to learn about ancient responses to this kind of threat. It's been a while since I read this. Now it's all coming back to me. He's got this friend in Molokai. But anyway, chapter 4, Scales and Feathers. Molokai, Hawaii, January 2024. He's in Hawaii to heal from that bite and to learn. And he starts the chapter being treated with a native concoction by his host, Cam, for this gigantic spider bite on his foot, which explains this swelling that he had on the airplane. So his friend is a trained indigenous healer with ancestral wisdom, and it's an inherited position. He hears a tale of Molokai, thousands of years old. The history is a litany of invasion and conquest, and it includes America before it was America, when the English were still running around here. Let's see. So I knew this story. I don't know why. I have a good friend who married a man from Kauai. Maybe that's why. But this is an important story. Hawaii is not American by choice. To settle any doubt about this, the Journal of Hawaii's Last Queen reemerged in 1993 to tell its story to the world after nearly a century in hiding. I think I read this. I think that's why. As a prisoner in her own palace, Queen Liliuokalani described her deep anguish as she found herself overthrown and forced to sign deeds of surrender, ceding her kingdom to the USA, only then to be arrested and imprisoned, since her very existence was now counted as an act of treason against the Pax Americana. The coup was the work of a leading American businessman, or was the work of leading American businessmen, the children and grandchildren of the Christian missionaries of a previous generation. Eager to cash in on Hawaii's abundant natural resources, these powerful businessmen were somehow able to obtain the armed support of an American warship to facilitate their seizure of the Hawaiian government. Once the Queen had been apprehended, forced to abdicate, and placed under arrest, Sanford B. Dole, the owner of the leading American corporation, promptly installed himself as Hawaii's new governor general and immediately set about reorganizing the country to the benefit of his fellow businessmen. And if that sounds familiar, it should, because he is the historic patriarch of Dole canned pineapple. Okay. So the British took over the Tahitians, and the Tahitians were originally, before the British came, they were something else before that. They were Polynesian. The Polynesians believed that they were from a group of people called the Menehune, and the Menehune, well, it's a strange story, which we'll get into. The discovery of the Queen's diary in 1993 actually elicited an apology from Clinton. Paul believes stories heal and from the past give us new perspective on our own time. And he asks, is his knowledge innate, his friend's knowledge, innate or taught by tradition? His friend Cam tells Paul a baby can be born open to learning this stuff, and an elder can help that child to remain open and absorb the information as he grows. So I would say that you have to be from a certain family, but then also you have to be trained up from an early age. Paul has heard this from a variety of global cultural elders. He's also heard many times of paleocosmic contact that came here to exploit or enslave, or to nurture and shield our ancestors. Apparently, they had higher cognitive powers and ceremonies that were protocols to reactivate our higher consciousness and intelligence. What his host Cam calls this is an open manawa, higher consciousness. Paul has recognized this in small children, his own and others, and he points out how conventional education doesn't want enlightenment, but wants to make young people industry ready. I argue this all the time. What's happening in the schools is intentional. They don't want educated people. They want a compliant workforce. Cam tells him that his ancient priestly line comes from Havilah, which is Eden, and their nobility had higher powers, and they traveled to the Nile and Africa. So this is the ancient Hawaiian origin story for the people there. Remote viewing was a normal thing that they could do. And this is also claimed to be true in the Mayan Popol Vuh, that their ancestors had vision that was not limited. Cam shared the concepts of higher knowing, interior intuition that engages the mind, heart, and the higher consciousness. Paul notes that the linguistics are similar. And once again, I'm glossing over the linguistics because it's complicated and I'd be reading pages and pages to you, but I recommend you read the book. It's interesting. Cam tells of a field of information sewn into the fabric of the cosmos, and how we're starting to sound just a little bit like panspermia or something. The Hawaiian word for esoteric wisdom, no uas, is exactly the same thing in Hermeticism. This is the same word. Esoteric Egyptian and Greek philosophy. And it had a powerful influence on early Christianity. If you want to know about the Hermetic principles, I did the book, The Kybalion, and we talked at great length about the Hermetic principles. And it's back, those videos are back there somewhere, earlier on in my channel, but they're still there. Paul sees these connections from a lifetime of hermeneutics, which is analyzing ancient texts. So there's different ways to analyze text. You can use form analysis. What kind of literature is it? What was its origin? What were the differences, the meanings of the original sources? Looking for anomalies. And you can also do it by, what was number 2 here? Or source analysis. So form analysis, and then source analysis. And the third is studying the meaning of words. And you're looking for origins and root words. And he confronted words with no known root meaning. So are these a loan word, a word that they borrowed from an unknown source? What would that source be if they don't have a known language that it derives from? So what they're saying is they have words in these early texts that come from nowhere on earth that they're aware of. I think I can say that. I think that's what he means. For example, Samuel, the guy in the Bible, Samuel learned from elders how to achieve and hold the theta state. This is the receptive higher cognition state that you can achieve through meditation, and it helps with remote communication, remote viewing, and telepathy. When you hit it between waking and sleeping, and he learned to use this to do remote communication, which we'll get to later in the book. Paul sees it in his babies, and he seeks a state of healing and knowledge, and it's similar to Hermetic ascension, or it's similar to Eastern Orthodox, a concept they have called theosis. In Hawaii, as in most places, he encounters ancient stories of paleocontact and colonization, equating it to today. He said Congress would be worried about it being an existential threat. So these are the stories of a history of invasion and conquest. Were we to face a similar situation, we would be calling it existential to our culture, society, Then he's talking about here, the reason why we're not hearing about this from the government, and the kind of reaction that they're likely to have if they did start talking about it. Paul's hoping to put that anxiety into a larger perspective and to get more insight into what paleocontact might have been like. His friend Cam in Hawaii says that they were invaded many times. Well, every time a cruise ship lands, Hawaii's invaded. Okay, hang on. He says, we've been invaded many times. In the time before the flood, my ancestors came here from Africa, but their story did not begin there. Our genealogy connects us with our wider family in Alaska, the Philippines, Central, South, and North America, and Australia. We all know that our shared ancestry goes back before the time when Earth's continents took their current shape. Our common ancestry came from somewhere else. We, the plants, the animals, all originated far, far away in Makali'i. And Makali'i is the Hawaiian word for the constellation the Pleiades. The same story is in Plato. Then there's the scientific panspermia theory that I just mentioned. Crick, Dr. Crick from Watson and Crick, who figured out the DNA helix, he firmly believed in the theory of panspermia. He postulated that human genetic code might be a normative property like light and gravity, and all it needs is the right environment to produce life. The Zulu tell a similar story, that pods of animal embryos traveled through space and landed and developed, and the first to appear were humans. Cam's story refers to the Pleiades. Paul's Cherokee friend, Blair, earlier we read about him in our last book, had said the same thing. Their star people were the tutors of humanity. So this Aboriginal belief in Australia, for example, grew, and it confused colonization. It confused colonization with invasion. I mean, they lose some of their impact over time. Let's put it that way. The colonizing British came later and did more colonization later, and the stories got conflated. So the stories of who came from the Pleiades and helped establish culture later gets conflated with the stories of invasion and colonization of the British who came to destroy their culture. And the Maori of New Zealand are the same stories. We are lovingly watched from the Pleiades, they say. Cam links the genealogy of the Aboriginal Australians, the islanders of Hawaii, with Native Americans. Paul, and he mentioned the Philippines too, I think. Paul, in the Eden Conspiracy, also drew this connection. He emphasizes it's a loving oversight that came, a support and a nurturing. So which star of the Pleiades? It's constellation, so there's a number of stars. Which star? Kim says Maya, M-A-I apostrophe A. Paul immediately makes association there with the Mayans and the Yucatan, who have the same exact origin story as the Hawaiians. And they have the Maya star, and the Mayans are the people that are in the Yucatan. What page am I looking for here? Okay. Our Pleiadian helpers taught us a way of life. This is Hawaiian. That was harmonious. We lived in balance with the animals and plants. Because our higher abilities were activated, because we each knew that the other was thinking and could feel what the other was feeling, there was no place for deception, separation, and competition. The only way was the way of harmony. We had no hierarchy, so there were no masters to slave for. Instead, we served one another and found a way of living which benefited all. This is how it was in the beginning, before it was invaded by the Mo'o. This is the ancient invaders who were not human. The invaders weren't human, they were reptilian, and some were feathered. Oh, the Mayans, same thing. Paul remarks that lizards don't have feathers, but our knowledge of ancient reptilians, dinosaurs, has certainly grown, and paleontology now believes that their babies were feathered. For example, T-Rex. And then what about the feathered serpent of myth, especially of Yucatan, Mexico? Interesting correlation. China, Wales, Georgia, Spain, Portugal, Mesoamerica, Egypt, ancient Hebrews, and more all talk of the fire-breathing serpents that fly, aka dragons. Who were they? Can you hear my bird? She hears me and she's trying to get my attention. The Mo'o did not come from the Pleiades. They came from the North Star. When they came, they brought a different attitude. They altered the energy of our world so that it was better for them, but worse for us. They lowered the oxygen in the atmosphere to dim our higher cognitive abilities and dumb us down. This is an intriguing echo of the Mayan story and the feathered serpents who released a vapor over human populations to suppress the humans' higher cognitive abilities, to dim their remote viewing, turn off their telepathic connection, and shut down their future viewing, all which lead to a more harmonious way of life. So echoes Mayan stories, feathered serpents, released a vapor. Okay, so the Hawaiian and the Mayan tales both talk about modifications of the atmosphere to decrease human intelligence. Two different places, far apart. Is this a shared collective memory? He equates it to scientific data saying that gas byproducts, fumes in the air, are shown to make kids less intelligent and more aggressive. Hope they don't do that again, because we're not going to be in a good place. Their same story is told in Nigeria. Cam's story is of non-human Ananu. Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? The Ananu who turned the world upside down and brought greed. The Sumerians told of reptilian Anunnaki, as did the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and the Akkadians. They all remembered invading giants who became overlords who shift human culture in some way. The Bible called them Anakim, and the Greek called them Anactorians. Cam tells Paul of the Ahumanu. I mean, it looks like a human, I'm just got to say. The Ahumanu, powerful beings with wings. The same story is depicted in the art of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Anatolia, those etchings of Hali. All these people share the cultural memory of what the invaders did. Paul points to nervous fear of the Pentagon and possible existential threat of non-human biologics, is what the Pentagon calls it. And he wonders what our ancestors saw. I mean, how much of this are we going to find out? Chapter 5, Contracts and Cultural Shifts. Now we're at the Red Sea, and he starts with a swim from the boat to the shore in water between Egypt and Saudi Arabia. The Babylonians say this is where human life emerged. He draws parallels between the stories of Mowgli and Tarzan, and the Enkidu in Gilgamesh. Enkidu is a primitive living with nature, enticed by beautiful women to join the civilization, the cities, the urbanization. So the Sumerians' reference to the Great Leap Forward is actually what this is. Our ancestors went from hunter-gatherers to urban life. This story is told by the Sumerians. It's also told by the Babylonians. How did this advance from subsistence living to organized communities? How did that happen? How did they suddenly, out of nowhere, possess the tools and the knowledge to urbanize and farm from being really primitive to all of a sudden boom. The catalyst had to be an external intervention. Intensive education given by being so different, called an extraordinary monster. And there's exactly this talked about on the shore of the Red Sea. The names are Oannes and Apkallu. These were beings bigger than humans, larger and somewhat fish-like. You've seen those. I'm sure you've seen those. Belonged to the authorities in the sky, who could also live on land and under the water. Like Haldi, these were emissaries from space. So this is written by Berosus. I forgot to write down who. Okay, he was a Greek Babylonian priest from the 3rd century BCE, and this is what he wrote from ancient stories. Its entire body appeared like that of a fish, and underneath the head was a second one like that of a man. Its appearance is still remembered and depicted to this day. This being taught humans writing, geometry, science, and technology of all kinds. He taught us how to cultivate grains and harvest fruits. He taught civil engineering for city building and showed us how to establish legal systems. In short, he provided everything that constitutes the marks of a civilization. And this is an ancient Greek guy writing about this 3 centuries before Christ, making reference to ancient stories. It's also mentioned in Gilgamesh and the Sumerian Adapa. Paul wonders if they looked part human and part fish because of unfamiliar clothing, uniforms, and equipment. It doesn't matter. They just seem non-human to the people on the earth. The story of Wallis is predated by tales from other places in which the first humans were introduced to living in harmony with nature and the natural ecosystems. The story has another perspective. It's about a population driven from country to city life under the power of a ruling class's laws. The rest of the population is criminalized and policed and forced to negotiate employment for money, to learn banking and record keeping, and invents a whole new category of debt and debtors. And then the population faces poverty and dispossession because they owe for the land and, that whole thing. And they had never before faced this before urbanization. So despite this, there was this whole new condition of living, even though they had now a surplus that they had been able to develop for the first time. So first they were taught how to farm and how to grow things and how to create a surplus. And then they were put into a created indebtedness to be controlled by an elite group. And I have a little note to myself here. I'll share it. This deserves an AI conversation. Douglas Rushkoff, Survival of the Richest, The Escape Fantasies of the Tech Billionaires. This narrative describes that. Anyway, the greater the corporations are and the more powerful, they increase insecurity and poverty in ordinary people. And we see that from very far back in history. It begs the question, was this program a decided program? Was it intentional? Paul calls it the Apkula syllabus. Was this really altruistic? And if so, for whom? So he's saying, okay, look at this. This seems a lot insidious. So they come, they offer help, They teach farming and urbanization. They push everybody off the land. They keep the surplus. They have people working for them to provide the surplus that they keep. And people are in a more concentrated environment where they have to pay for things. So they set up banking and a system of debt. And it all sounds alarmingly familiar. So this is all to the advantage of the proprietors of society at the expense of human population. And this is done by the Anuna, the Mesopotamian sky people. This is a replicate story of Cam's Hawaiian accounts of colonization and conquest by Anuna, and later the Dole Company. Anuna brought greed, division, competition, discord, not harmony, as they were taught to be self-centered and to fight as rivals. Their culture before didn't have that. They stole and privatized the land. Their ownership destroyed the traditions of land sharing. They introduced the concept of money, and then they used it to enslave the people, and then they lost their freedom, and then the king ruled over the people with a set of laws and a hierarchy, and the threat of violence from the hierarchy is the law today. The maintenance of order and a peaceful way of life rests in threats of the hierarchy against the general public. Hasn't always been that way. In a peaceful country, when the populace demonstrates against the privilege of violence without consequences, it's a shock. We're not used to the situation that we're entering right now, and people are shocked by what's going on. And Paul is saying, well, just take a step back and look at these historical narratives. It's the same as it ever was. Working for money puts power in the hands of a caste for whom you work. Over time, the value of money decreases, so you continue to need more. This is putting people under even more pressure in order to maintain a quality of life. Dividing the land does the same. It's distributed to the ruling classes, the colonizers, and it changes the status of general population of native people. They become tenants and are controlled by rents or taxes or duties or tithes. Colonization, the colonizers get richer, the people get poorer and are in debt to the elite. And the stratification of society, you end up with rulers, and then you have public servants, and then you have the workers. This story from ancient Hawaii is the same throughout history. Paul describes the Enclosure Acts between the 1600s and the 1900s that privatized 45% of the English common land and displaced peasants. It drove urbanization and monetized agriculture to benefit the land-owning class. Previous to that, people lived scattered around and shared common land, like they had common grazing land. That's why in England they'll talk about a park, it's the commons. It's what's left of common grazing ground. And eventually the wealthy dominated, took more and more of the land for themselves, forced people to work on the land to pay rent and to give either taxes or part of their farming, part of their crops. That's the word, part of their crops. And they became slaves to the land, serfs, and under the hierarchical control of the elite. And this was spread globally by the British Empire. They did it in Ireland. They talks about the seizure of Kenya by the British. And, of course, America. And the Elohim in the Middle East. So obviously, this is the result of a move from subsistence living to surplus and high density living brought by farming. And this created a system of control from the top down. The Sumerians their work talks about the conflict of the sky people over how to manage humanity. They got into a fight with each other. The gods were angry with each other. And it echoes the Council of Power in Genesis, the conversations between Yahweh and the serpent. Same conversations. It's also seen in the Mayans, the Nigerians, in Greece, and in other global lore. These invaders, described as unhuman, not human, sound like dragons, and these stories are ubiquitous. They're global also. The word serpent actually means snake or dragon. In Lesotho, there are drawings of a dragon that are called the snake. When one maps the world of dragon stories and with ancient migrations, we see two distinct families of dragons. One is older than the other. For example, the dragon myths of China. The earth was barren and the people were starving, and 4 dragons interceded with the emperor in the sky, and the dragons took over themselves. They tried to get the emperor in the sky to help people, and he didn't, so they took over. The humans grew and prospered, but the emperor in the sky got angry and banished the dragons, each to bury under a different mountain. These became the 4 great rivers of China, and it's similar stories in multiple cultures globally. So back to about 175,000 years ago, there were significant similarities with Genesis and with Sumer, and similar to many global origin stories, not always dragons, but the same idea of non-human help that came in a time of chaos with relative success or lack thereof. The second wave of dragon stories goes to about 10,000 years ago. And this coincides with the most recent ice age. It's a moment of existential threat for humanity. This time it coincides with Karaka Dog. This is, where they dug up that place, and the leap into agronomy, where they found the oldest farm, and the appearance of Wallis and the Apakalu. They were described as extraordinary monsters, and their character is told. Let's see. Okay, so I don't want to read like page after page after page of this book out loud. So I'm just going to pick a couple of things, but believe me when I say that it's a huge, gigantic list of things. The Chinese story that is echoed in biblical stories of Genesis: a world with one ocean, devastated land, populated by humans, need for reclamation and rehabilitation. Powerful beings came in a strange object, separated the ocean water from the fresh water. One of those beings breaking rank to improve conditions for humans, a fight between them about what to do about humanity. And this is the same as Sumer and Gilgamesh, a world of one ocean, separation of waters, fighting between the superior beings, one more compassionate than the other. And then they all talk about the demotion and exile of the helper humans. Where am I? But eventually, these dragons are succeeded by human leaders. And in several stories, the dragon is beheaded by a prince. And this is a repeating story. Daniel in Bel and the Dragon, St. George and the Dragon. And they also share common moments when the elders lose their fear. Enough is enough. And then they decide we have nothing to lose, the humans. We have nothing to lose. And they realize if they work in solidarity, they will defeat the dragon or show it that humanity can no longer be controlled and subjugated. And the dragon slinks away into lonely isolation. Yahweh is dismissed by the elders of Israel. However, Yahweh continues to pull strings behind closed doors, defining policy and demanding tribute, especially from the spoils of war, wars that Yahweh commanded. This is persistence of non-human power and the danger of covert governance, and it goes way back. And it's also echoed in Cam's Hawaiian tales. Many, many, many cross-cultural correlations. Therefore, our patterns of society, the government from top-down hierarchy, money, all of it is draconian. And it reflects entrenched patterns of ancient invasions, maybe he's asking, possibly. Are we repeating the patterns of our ancestry, ruled by the cold-blooded to manage the human population? It was certainly reflected in the island stories of Ananu, and then also in the Bible stories of the Elohim. It's certainly a noticeable change from the time of Abraham and tribal treaties to Moses, and in which the story of the Hebrew scribe describes an alien invasion. So I think I'll stop here. It's the end of this chapter. It's a good place to stop. It's always hard to tear ourselves away once we get really into it. But that's the end of chapter 5, and we'll call that the end of video number 2. And we'll be back with more. Very compelling story. It's once the way Paul lays it out, and I am glossing over so much because the story is dense with information. Once you start drawing parallels between all these cultural origin stories, it's remarkable how similar they are. You just would be in severe denial to say that they didn't tell the same story. It's fascinating. Okay, we'll call that good. And I so appreciate everybody who comes back for more. And I raffled off that book. Rosemary Robertson won the book Hate Won't Win by Mallory McMurrow. And there are 3 other people whose names were called. And I've emailed you, so, or not emailed you, if you commented on our book, Hate Won't Win, and you got your name called, I commented. So go back and check your comments, because that's the only way I know how to get in touch with everybody. You need to email me and give me your address so I can mail you your book. I only have the 1 copy of McMurrow's book, but I have other books that you can pick from. So thank you very much for watching. I very much appreciate everybody who views these things, who subscribes, especially if you thumbs up, and consider joining my membership. There's always something interesting going on there behind closed doors. And in the meantime, Slanga Foil, Slancha.